Director of Fairbanks North Star Borough Community Planning, and she has graciously agreed to come visit with us today, and she's actually doing this as a warm-up to a presentation she's going to make at the Chamber, Fairbanks Chamber at noon. So Christine, as I said, she's the Director of the Fairbanks North Star Borough Department of Community Planning, and has served in that capacity since 2014. She's been she has 30 years experience working in community development, planning, and economic development in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska. She's a member of the American Planning Association for over 20 years and a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners since 1998. So Christine, welcome.
Thank you
for coming today.
Thank you, and thanks for being my rough draft here, a sample presentation. So this is a presentation that we've done in various places around town. I just haven't done it myself before, and I did a little editing and added a few things for you. So it's what we call Zoning 101, just the basics, but what is it and why does it matter? And I'll try and tie it back to energy a little bit towards the end. So planning is about public health, safety, and welfare for our communities. It is laid out in state statute as to what planning is supposed to be, planning, platting, land use regulations for the borough. The state gives those powers to the borough. We plan for both cities as well. And so zoning regulations, land use permits, those sorts of things, we're required to have a planning commission. And so the Regional Comprehensive Plan is one of the requirements. It's required by the state. It's the framework for all our land use goals. We have general goals for the entire borough, which, as diverse as it is and as large as it is challenging to come up with something that works for everyone. It also covers zoning code amendments and rezones, which are required to comply with the comprehensive plan. The Complan also helps with projects like getting grants or for the Polaris building. They want to know if whatever you want to do on that site complies with your comprehensive plan, which is one of the reasons we are working on a new downtown plan, because the other one was so specific that the Polaris didn't really fit in there. So the current comp plan was adopted in 2005, but the map is from 1990, which leads to some issues. And so we're taking an approach on area plans. You probably heard about the Sulcher Badger plan that just got adopted last month. We also have the North Pole plan, and we're working on trying to get the downtown Fairbanks plan finished.
So we would expect a process that almost mirrors what happened at North Pole, or in on a specific area.
Yes, and so we look at it, because it is so hard to update the entire regional comp plan at one time, and you can't get Esther to agree with, Salcha to agree with, everybody's got something different for their community. So we're looking at it more as a patchwork quilt now. So you have the underlying area, which is the regional comp plan, and then you lay these area plans over top, and those are more specific, so they supersede, essentially, the regional comp plan if there's conflict. So that's the approach we're taking. The Assembly was kind enough to give us some project funding, so hopefully every 2 years we'll be able to do an area plan. It's not enough to do one every year, and trying to do it in-house like we're doing with the downtown plan, everything supersedes it, so it just doesn't work real well. So we're going to take that Sulcher Badger model and keep reproducing it in other areas. We don't know exactly which area we're going to do next, but we got to get the downtown plan done, and then we're going to figure that out.
So it's Sulcher Badger, not just Sulcher?
No, it's Sulcher Badger. Basically, I do have some maps I can show you. But because the Badger Road area is the fastest growing area in the borough and has been for 10 years, we figured, and it's within that commute shed for Eielson, we wanted to make sure that we addressed kind of the housing and the land use issues for that entire area, because it's going to continue to grow and probably even faster. So we have a regional comprehensive plan map that designates different types of things, urban, rural, but it's pretty vague. So that's why we're going with the more specific area plan, so that we really can guide development through this. The biggest issue with the past map was the availability of sewer and water, and not, because that drives development or stops development. So the City of North Pole plan was adopted in 2010. So we have low density residential, high density residential, commercial, much more specific land use categories. And the map is a guideline, it's not the zoning ordinances. So right now, the zoning doesn't match the map as well as it should. So we're looking at, there's a downtown North Pole rezone project going on to change some of the general use to commercial, et cetera.
So that's the shape of,
That's the downtown one, yes. Sorry, not downtown, North Pole. Yeah. So,
Is that the Salcha Badger?
no,
No.
that will come next, I'll show you here
I
in
mean,
just a
that's
second.
the city boundary? Is that how that is defined?
City
you're
boundary
outside
plus
the city,
some,
yeah.
there's some that is outside the city limits, particularly in that north end there.
Yes.
And what they looked at, I believe, because it happened before I got here, but they looked at where water extension and potentially sewer extension may happen.
Okay.
So, because that's where that allows for more dense development. So, 1 acre lot sizes, you don't get a lot of density, so.
Does that correlate with the gas layout?
I think so. It should. This was done by a consultant through the City of North Pole. I'm not sure that the borough had a lot of involvement in this. I mean, it had some, but this was, it was actually the same.
That would be the extent of the water project.
Okay. So, but that's a good point. As gas gets developed, this map can change. So, and should change, because that allows for different levels of development. But water and sewer is really the restricting element right now. Okay, so land use plans that don't, or policies that don't align with future growth, you get conflicts. The neighbors want to protect certain things. We like low density here, and yet you can't get efficient services when you are low density. So that's the balance, looking at what's out there now, what should be in the future. These plans should be a minimum of 20 years growth outward. And then here is the Salcha Badger area. And so you can see we've got other categories that you don't see elsewhere: urban adjacent residential, rural suburban residential, outlying areas, military, agriculture, public multi-use, and river corridors. So these were unique land use classifications for this particular plan.
Is this map then going to be presented to the Borough Assembly for adoption, or?
It has been, yeah, last month,
Okay. And been adopted?
yes.
And so you can see the little white box where the more detailed or the more, detailed map, focused map for downtown-ish North Pole fits.
Right.
Okay.
And where's the bridge?
Oh, you're asking me questions. End of the purple, somewhere in there? Yeah.
Well, there's Moose Creek.
That's right, but Johnson Road,
It's,
Okay, way down.
there,
way down,
No.
down.
Here.
Oh, there it
Yeah,
is.
right there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
be a little up from that, yeah. I think where that crook is.
Yeah.
That could be a development node, it would seem.
So, and that is something that they talked about, is development nodes versus strip kind of commercial development. Where should it go? So, we've got mixed industrial commercial, and then we have rural/suburban commercial in the red. So, but this is just the first phase. This is the land use map, and then the zoning is created to implement that, because these are guidelines. They don't have any real strength in regulatory terms. So then implementing the comp plan is what we do day to day. And so applying the comp plan guidance, rezones are required to comply with the comp plan, as are conditional uses. So that's direct involvement of the comp plan. And then amending regulations. So zoning code text amendments. These are some that we've done recently. Marijuana facilities, about 4 or 5 years ago. Rural setbacks, community gardens, urban livestock. The Assembly also, proposes amendments to the zoning code, but they still have to meet within that general comprehensive plan guidance, or they should anyway. We also amend the subdivision code. The road construction exemptions was the most recent of any substance. And then new uses, and so this is one where energy is part of that discussion. So not too long ago, well, maybe it was 9 months or more ago, we were talking about these little mini power plants that, whether they're attached to a school or a private development, they don't quite fit in our code at this point. We have public utilities and service uses, but if it's a private enterprise that somebody wants to power their warehouse, their manufacturing facility, doesn't quite fit in our code. So that's where, when these issues come up, we try and stay ahead of technology, but that doesn't always work. And with, we saw with marijuana, if the state does something, we have to play catch up to make sure our code adequately implements it. So that's one, energy related, that things change and we have to try and make sure that we're staying on top of things.
The mayor's been talking about access to wood supply and the road, I guess you'd call the road regulations, road construction regulations are kind of a deterrent to being able to access those wood supplies.
DNR routes. Yeah, DNR.
Yep,
routes.
state,
DNR
whether they're
DNR
fire breaks or, yes.
And the borough's Title 17, so the borough is requiring Title 17 be applied, even though the purpose is just to access wood lots.
Right.
So it is
So we had a meeting about that yesterday. We're trying to come up with a way to differentiate between a real subdivision and these access roads, whether they're public trails or fire breaks or whatever the purpose is of, the purpose is not to subdivide lots, but the only way we talk about easements in our code right now is through Title 17 and the subdivision. And part of it is the monumentation and survey requirements are expensive. So, and the state doesn't have a lot of money right now. So we're looking at ways that we can address it in code, maybe a separate section in Title 17 that's more talking about public easements versus subdivision. So we are working on it. It's never, never simple. So why do we have zoning? Primarily land use compatibility and protecting the public health, safety, and welfare. As I said, the state has given zoning authority to the borough. The cities could take it over if they chose to, but so far, staffing issues and whatever else is stopping them, they don't. So Title 18, which is our zoning code, groups uses separately into residential, commercial, big kind of categories. And then we have supplemental regulations that deal with specific things, whether it's telecommunications or marijuana or a variety of things. We don't have supplemental regulations for everything, but bigger issues.
What's that bottom line?
Well, I don't know how to get rid of that green thing.
Oh,
It says public health, safety, and welfare is essentially what it's saying.
So really, the pictures over on the right are examples kind of non-compatibility. or
Not,
potentially?
yeah, the middle one definitely, you know, you got a residential dwelling next to either some sort of, power plant, refinery, something there. I think the fire one is related to separation of structures, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the historic building patterns. But,
And what the top one looks like, people backing directly out into the roadway.
it could be, yeah. So, aesthetics as well, you know, undergrounding power, and we don't do that as much here, but, you know, that's a big,
What's an example, also density?
that's true, yeah. So, this is just briefly showing you how to navigate and find information. So, when you go to our webpage, you can go to Your Government, and it lists the Code of Ordinances, and you can get into Title 17 and 18 and everything else right there. It shows you kind of the variety, all the zones that we have, supplemental regulations, and some of the processes, non-conforming and rezones and things like that. And then maps and GIS, you can get in and look at the zoning, click on a section, so that red there is the central business district. And, you know, you can click on the regulations, and it's actually pretty accessible. We always are working on making it more accessible and more information and less clicks to get there, but that's a process.
That area is, I imagine, always growing.
Actually, as part of the downtown working group, we're talking about potentially reeling back what we call the core. So our zoning code is built sort of on layers, and so what you can do in the single family, you can do in the two family plus some things. What you can do in the two family, you can do in the multifamily plus some things. Central business districts allows most things that are in the general commercial. But what we're doing as part of this downtown planning effort is really looking at what's the core, where's the walkable community that we want to keep that, and then some other layers of mixed use, commercial, residential, outside of that. And in fact, we've got a new map online that shows those land use, the new proposed land use designations that include, as I said, those mixed commercial and residential, sort of the full-blown commercial, what we call general commercial now. So we will likely have some new land use designations in this area, as well as some new zones that better implement what we're trying to achieve. And that's the whole point of zoning, is making it work to whatever the goal is for that area. So, as I mentioned, we have larger categories, and there's 5 of them: agricultural, a couple of zones, residential, commercial, industrial, and then the general use is the other. And that's always our problematic one. It's the most of our land area, and you pretty much do anything anywhere, which can lead to land use incompatibilities between neighbors. When you can put a sawmill next to a single-family dwelling, next to a shooting range, next to a pig farm, you're apt to have some conflicts at some point. So, and we saw this a lot when we were doing marijuana zoning, and neighbors that thought they were a residential neighborhood. Well, they are, but they're zone general use. And so they didn't want marijuana store next to them, but everything goes. So there is some hoops in regards to dwellings and marijuana establishments. They have to go through conditional uses, but most of those were granted. So, we did see a couple of rezones from general use to residential, and the Assembly made them free so that if people wanted to rezone out of general use into a residential zone, they could do it for free. We didn't see as many as we hoped we would see. So people like their flexibility until it's the neighbor.
So it's not their backyard.
Right, exactly. So we divide this up into permitted uses, those things that have minimal impacts, conditional uses that generally have higher impacts but might be appropriate in one location but not necessarily in every location. And then our code is written that if it's not listed in a zone or allowed in a zone, it's not allowed. So that's disallowed. And then each zone has, as I said, the permitted uses listed, the top one there in red, and then the conditional uses. And again, you can get all of this online. And then we have a variety of processes. So permitted uses are just a zoning permit done by staff, essentially over-the-counter free within 5 days. If you need a conditional use, it has to go to the Planning Commission. 2 months actually is there's no way anymore. With all the public notice and staff reports and whatnot, it's closer to 3 months to get a conditional use, $800 or $1,000. Most conditional uses are $800. Telecom and some other things with supplemental regulations that we have to analyze are $1,000. And then variances, again, they generally go to the Planning Commission. We have an administrative one, but hasn't really been used. That's the $300, although I think it's $400 now. And again, closer to 3 months. And then rezones have to go to the Planning Commission, but then they go to the Assembly, so they're 3 to 4 months. So we do a lot to help people speed the process by getting complete applications. Zoning standards include minimum lot size. Even in the GU, there's a minimum lot size. And setbacks for most zones, not in general commercial, not in GU, and I think the industrial ones have less setbacks. Height, we only have height limitations in one zone right now. Parking and signage and outdoor lighting are some of the other requirements.
Would that be like somewhere by the airport? Height?
Actually, no. It's in the light commercial zone, which is intended to be sort of a buffer between residential zones and the general commercial zone. So it's kind of a, it restricts the lighting, it restricts the hours of operation, it restricts the height to kind of give those residential uses a little space. Yeah. So,
That says, is that LC, light commercial?
yes.
And then it says unrestricted for height there.
I'm going to have to look at that. Yeah, I didn't put this slideshow together, so I got to check a couple of things before noon. So, yeah, either, I don't think we've changed that. I think we still have a height limitation there, so I'm not sure where I got that, if that's current or not. So, all right. Thank you for checking or seeing that. So setbacks is the minimum distance between a structure and a lot line. Some of that is for fire protection. Some of that is for just space. You can see right there, one of our Planning Commission members, in fact our chair now, has said this frequently, that setbacks make good neighbors. I always add, and fences and trees do too. So, but the point of this is, traffic safety, privacy, drainage, land use compatibility, and along streets, potential street widening. We had this issue, I'm trying to remember the name of the subdivision. We rezoned it because those envelopes were so narrow you couldn't build anything in it. So they were small lots, and previously had a smaller setbacks, but we put, in order to combine lots, or to sort of promote the combining of lots in order to get water and sewer on a lot, not sewer, sorry, septic, we put big setbacks on them in order to get people to combine. Well, what that did was gave you a 10 to 15 foot wide building envelope, the white in the middle, and that zone just didn't work for that neighborhood. So we ended up rezoning that neighborhood to 2-family, I think it was, that had smaller setbacks and more like this, with the 5, 5, and 5, so that they had an available building envelope that they could actually develop the property. Some of them still use 2 lots, but many of them only had 1, and so it just didn't make sense. Okay, so we have a few other tools, other regulations that apply to an area. Groundwater protection overlay outside of North Pole is a prime example. It's also a problematic example that I'll tell you a little bit more about. And then some other supplemental regulations. So shooting ranges was one we did a couple of years ago, because we had a shooting range right next to a residential neighborhood, and it didn't work out well. So then buffer requirements. So we already had distance of liquor stores from schools. When we did marijuana zoning, we did buffers from a lot of other things besides just schools. So that as compatible as you can make those things from residences and other sensitive uses, whether they were child care or treatment facilities, that kind of thing.
In all cases, it seems that my perception, the definition of compatibility is as much community-driven as it is departmentally imposed. It's a conversation.
Yes. And so that's one of the things that traditionally you had your single-family residential neighborhoods, you had your commercial here, and you had your industrial. Well, as people choose not to commute any more than necessary or want to save gas or expense or whatever, then the commercial and the residential has been increasingly mixed. And we're starting to see some of that here, or at least we're going to try and promote that in the downtown and the surrounding the downtown. One of the barriers to that is finding developers that do both. In big cities, you do, but in smaller towns, even the size of ours, you have residential developers and commercial developers, and they don't generally do either or both. So that's a challenge, but when people choose that downtown lifestyle, then you see more of that happening. And so then we get back to the really old style of zoning or land use, where you have neighborhood hubs of, you know, whether it's a little bodega or a, you know, grocery store or, you know, like the dry cleaner, kind of a commercial neighborhood hub that only serves a certain walking distance, essentially, versus the drive to everything and load up your car at Costco, so, which has its place. But not everybody wants to drive everywhere, and hopefully, you know, we're promoting that, or at least enabling that. So now we have to measure distances from marijuana stores. We built that into our regulations, and
So the school kids get more exercise?
true. No. So
Well, that's really what I meant by community conversation. I mentioned that liquor stores and marijuana stores are treated a bit differently.
they are.
Liquor stores have been around a lot longer. So in the conversation regarding marijuana stores, being more recent, public input, wanted, the will of the public was to have a bit more restriction, a bit more buffers and setbacks, and so that's been built into the code,
Yeah.
through a conversation.
Well, and also, marijuana stores have a lot more things they're buffered from. So liquor stores are pretty much just schools. When we were going through the marijuana working group, we came up with a group of sensitive uses. When it got to the assembly, they added some. So they wanted to see a few more things on there.
From
So-
public input, or?
Yeah, from public input as well as their personal philosophy. So treatment centers got added, youth.
You mentioned childcare, that's different than a school.
Yeah, and it's childcare of a certain size. Because part of our problem was, without business licenses, we don't know where some of this stuff is. So we did childcare that is state licensed, so we could get on the website and see if they have a state license or not. But the home daycares ones didn't get buffered, so. So conditional uses, variances, everything that goes to the Planning Commission or the Assembly involves public hearings. Right now, our notice distance are 1,000 and 2,000 feet from the property lines. It used to be half that, and we had some problematic, controversial ones where the citizens didn't feel like they were able to speak. And so we actually doubled that buffer distance, and it has been working really well. We generally don't have a lot of complaints about that. Right now, grandfather rights is one that is still in the same notice distance. That, we get people saying, why are you sending me this? I don't want it. So we're looking at reducing that for grandfather rights. So land use impacts, these are all the compatibility issues that we deal with. Hours of operation, noise, odor, traffic and parking and lighting and dust and litter and all of those things that as a neighbor you could be unhappy about happening next to you, whether it's a racetrack or a wedding venue or a dog kennel. All of those can be controversial. So then we have some other regulations that we deal with. Floodplain management. We were one of the first communities in the whole U.S. to have floodplain regulations, and we continue to try and improve ours. We've got a couple of flood studies going on, which most of those flood studies reduce our floodplain because our floodplain with the braided rivers and sloughs don't fit the Mississippi model. So by doing in-depth studies, we're able to pull people out of the floodplain that really don't need that extra regulation and better serve our community while protecting those properties that do. Title 17, we've already talked about subdivision regulations. City of Fairbanks and the City of North Pole both have building permits. The rest of the borough does not. State Fire Marshal does a review of commercial property plans and dwelling buildings with 4 or more units. So they don't do inspections, however. So that's a sort of a hole in our process. They look at the plans, but what actually gets constructed outside of the city
So
is an issue, can be.
State Fire Marshal has kind of been a bone of contention in this community, particularly since they moved out of the community to Anchorage. A lot of complaints about the State Fire Marshal, engaging in issues that people I talk to don't believe are appropriate. What's their limitation, or what are they supposed to engage in? You say engage in residential of 4 units of 4 or more.
Mm-hmm.
What about commercial?
Yeah, and commercial.
And
Yeah,
commercial.
and industrial. So they do fire plan review for that category of use. So 3 units and less residential is not, they don't look at them.
And for a private use garage?
Private use, no. So if you are, you have a big garage on your property where your house is and you're, fixing up your 64 Mustang, no. But if you are bringing other people's vehicles to your site and charging them to fix up their 64 Mustang, that is commercial, and it has zoning implications as well as fire plan review implications. And that's something that, this community is, people move here because they don't like a lot of rules and regulations, and so that's part of what we do, is try and educate people about the difference between a personal use garage that can be just as big as a commercial one, but it's what's happening inside it that is the discussion. So, and we do have home occupations that are allowed, but there are limited parameters of what people can do as a home occupation as well.
So if it's a personal use garage that the fire marshal is not supposed to have purview over,
That's my understanding.
well, you might want to tell him.
Well, we don't have a lot of interaction. I mean, again, not in the community. It's tougher to do that. Their resources have definitely been scaled back, so they're doing, kind of what they have to by state statute, and as far as I know, anyway. So, if you've got a specific for me, let me know, and I'll see what I can do to follow up. So, DEC is our septic agency. so, they review all commercial septics. They have limited, jurisdiction over, personal residential septics. We always encourage them, or, the public to go through DEC, but we do not have anything that requires them to show that they've been through DEC to get a permit from us. So, unlike most communities, nobody has to show that they have water or septic in order to get a zoning permit for a dwelling, or anything else for that matter. So, and that's very unusual, really is. But a lot of dry cabins out there, and so, that's a lifestyle choice that the borough supports. So. And then business license and other permits. The borough doesn't have business licenses, but the cities do. And, there may be Army Corps permits and other sorts of permits related to your development. So it just depends on what's happening, so. And so legal nonconforming, this is a big issue in the community right now. For a variety of reasons. People don't always know and haven't known where their property lines were. So they build where they think their property is, but it isn't always what they thought. And so, everything from the 1920s on, people have structures out there, and then zoning's laid on top of that. Some of that zoning has been perhaps less appropriate than others, and it's changed a bunch of times, flip-flop back and forth between, R1, R2, general residential. It's gone back and forth, particularly in the city of Fairbanks. And those setbacks have changed from 20 to 10 to 5 to nothing to back and forth again. So trying to figure out whether something is currently in compliance is tough because we don't always know where the property lines is. And then was it in compliance when it was constructed is even tougher. So, but legal nonconforming basically is it was legally created and then the zoning changed. That's different than a violation in that with a violation it was never legal. So there's a difference between nonconforming, i.e. never legal, and legal nonconforming.
So grandfather rights.
Yep, that's what this is.
Grandfather rights.
Yes,
Legal
so that's what we're talking about. So
okay.
Grandfather rights is another word or another phrase for legal nonconforming. I tend not to use grandfather rights when I can because everybody understands that phrase differently. They're a term of art, not a term of science. So this is Sunshine Health Foods, which the top one is last year when they came in for grandfather rights, and this is the 1968 version. And so what they have to do to get grandfather rights is to show that it was legally existing prior to the zoning that they are not in compliance with. And so we were able to do that on 3 sides of the building, but not one side of the building. So they were denied grandfather rights. They actually appealed it, and I believe they lost their appeal. They did everything, including going to the library and finding old phone books to show that, because another element of this is, was it discontinued? Because after a certain period of time, if the use, say the building stays empty and it's not a market anymore, or it's turned into a residential building or something else, that grandfather rights disappears. Now, the problematic part is we flip-flop between 12 and 36 months since the 60s. So we have to pin down a date to say, was it 12 months or was it 36 months? Currently it's 36, but so they went and found listings in the phone book for this shopper's market for a number of years, but their front setback from one of the roads, there was no way we couldn't approve it. And we're limited to the facts. It's a very fact-based decision.
So in that instance, what would happen if you say that
Well,
the setback wasn't grandfather vis-a-vis one of the roads, but again, the building is there?
right. And this is the economic development, community development conundrum that we're under. Do we want people to upgrade existing structures rather than tearing them down or leaving them to fall down. And so basically, and I'll get to it with code enforcement, so we could take them to court and make them pull down 5 feet of the front of their building, maybe, but that's not in the better good. So with our code enforcement backlog, we're not going to enforce on this. But they're going to have problems perhaps lending, getting financing, and getting it bought or sold because of that. So the market is regulating it. We're not doing enforcement on these, although we could.
So, the issue is that the ramps and walkway are in the,
Well, actually, I think part of the
setback.
wall is too, the roof and the wall. So I'm not sure where the notes on this picture came from, but, yeah. So there was one portion of the building that was maybe 5 or more feet that was still within the setback. So, and that's part of, perhaps in the downtown plan, the CBD has 0 setbacks. And some of these other zones do too. And in walkable communities, you want your building up to the sidewalk. So looking at whether those zones still, or those setbacks for those zones that these things are in, still makes sense is part of the analysis that we look at. And I don't think it might have been Juneau. They looked at all of the variances they were doing, and they were giving them away like candy. And they realized the reason they were having to do that is because their setbacks weren't appropriate for that area of the historic kind of downtown. So they changed it. So that's something you can do. The problem is we're all over the map. And so, these are sprinkled throughout our community. We haven't had a really long-term progress towards how things should develop. And so people put them in, some of them are 5 feet from the sidewalk, some of them are 20 feet, some of them are on the sidewalk, And so it's hard to get a really cohesive practice of, okay, this, we're going to have 0 setbacks, and this is going to be 5 to 10, and that'll fix everybody's problems. We're trying to come up with solutions, but it's not fixing everything. This is one of the ones that just fell outside the parameters. And we have a lot of, not just setback issues, that we're trying to come up with solutions for people, and particularly with grandfather rights, it's really a problematic one. So, and part of this impetus was the DoddFrank Act that came into being in 2010, so, which has made the lending industry more careful and more cognizant of legal nonconforming and just generally nonconforming issues. So we did some outreach to appraisers in the community and the lending industry. We did it a couple of seminar sessions. And what we found is that a lot of appraisers were just checking assumed grandfather rights without actually knowing. Now, if it was my license on the line, I wouldn't do that. But that was happening. It's not happening as much anymore because of the education, and the realtors are getting educated. So before Dodd-Frank, grandfather rights were assumed to be automatic and that they didn't lapse. And they were just assumed, well, I'm old, I get grandfather rights. And what the banks were concerned about is being able to automatically rebuild after fire or disaster or damage. Yeah, go ahead.
am I the only one here that doesn't know what DoddFrank is?
Probably.
Well, then, you can tell me afterwards.
Okay, it's a federal act. I don't even know all the parameters. I just know the impact on the local real estate market, in that basically requiring banks to jump through more hoops when they lend. And the banks got more risk averse, I would say, in general, because of the housing market issues.
Tighter
So,
financial regulation after the big meltdown, big
Yeah.
financial meltdown.
yeah, so, yeah, 2006, 2008, and then 2010 was when that went through. And I'm sure there's a lot more other stuff in there that I'm not aware of, but this is the impacts on our community. So there wasn't a lot of documentation required by the banks on nonconformities, or, you know, whether you met setbacks, whether your lot met the minimum zoning requirements. So a lot of people bought houses in that, you know, up to 2010, they didn't have any idea they were in violation or they were legal nonconforming or not. So now, when they're trying to sell, they're getting caught in this documentation requirement. And some of them are really getting caught because they weren't legal nonconforming, they were just illegal. And our code doesn't have solutions for everybody's problem. And that's the groundwater protection area outside of North Pole, and that's some of the setback requirements. My first experience with this was 4+ years ago when elderly lady was trying to sell her house because her husband had some major disease and they needed to go outside, and their house had burned down, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years before that. They rebuilt it on the same foundation, and their Arctic entry in the front of the house was in the setback. And we couldn't give them grandfather rights. And this is their major investment. They're trying to finish their life out, and they were stuck. Now, I think eventually they sold, but non-conventional financing was one of the only solutions at that time. Since then, we've instituted amnesty. You know, we've tried to come up with some other processes to help, but there's still a few people that fall in the gap that are really stuck, and there's probably more than a few. Some of them, you know, groundwater protection is one where, you know, the overlay was created in 95. It wasn't laid on the ground till 99. There was some differences on whether how deep a crawl space could be. The groundwater protection is where the groundwater comes up from the ground behind the dam, or in front of the dam there in North Pole, and floods basements. It was created in order to help people not construct in a way that would have repeated damage. But between the, you know, from the 100 people that flooded in the 82, I think it was, to now, the home ownership has changed. People don't know about it anymore. And a lot of houses have been built with deep crawl spaces, 4 feet and deeper, and basements that now are, well, they've always been illegal, and now they're having problems selling those houses. And, you know, this is where people want to buy right now, close to Eielson, and, you know, there's frustration, and a lot of it is older homeowners that didn't know at the time, and homeowners that have bought in the 2000s that didn't know about it, and now they're stuck with the house. So after DoddFrank, the banks are requiring, if the lot is smaller than the minimum lot size, they want a lot size grandfather rights. If there's a potential for it to be too close to the property line, they want a structural grandfather rights. We also have use grandfather rights like Sunshine Foods. You know, was this a grocery store all along? It's now in a 2-family. A grocery store isn't allowed. And also, you know, if you have a duplex and a triplex on your property, and now you're only allowed a duplex, you know, how long's that triplex been there? That sort of variances. So, or not variances, sorry, grandfather rights. So we do a lot of those. In 2010, we were doing about 20 a year. We are now doing nearly 200 a year. And the amount of research that it takes for these things is astronomical, and the property owners have no idea how to find this information, if it's even available to them. You know, old zoning is not available. So we do a ton of research for a $50 fee, and you know, thousands of dollars of resources to try and deal with this. And so far, we haven't come up with any really great solutions. We're still trying to figure out how to make it do this legally and also meet the community need. But as I said, it can impact marketability. The lending industry wants certainty of being able to rebuild. Here's an example of the Arctic entry situation. And the property owner is supposed to be able to demonstrate that the structure was created legally prior to zoning. Most of the time they can't partially because of all the flip-flopping and so on. So rezones, I'll go through this quickly. It goes to the Planning Commission. They have to adopt findings. They make a recommendation to the Assembly to either approve with special limitations, which are restrictions. They can suggest an amendment to a more appropriate zone, or they can suggest denial. And here's a recent case that we did out on Gulfstream, large tracts. They wanted to sell this off, and so the RE is essentially a 2-acre residential zoning, and RA is a residential ag 5-acre zoning. It was all vacant. You can see right there in the middle, the state had already started a subdivision process for a piece of it. UA owned half of it, about half of it, and DNR owned about half of it. And something else we also look at is suitability. We did this suitability analysis based on a variety of things: wetlands, slopes, permafrost, as best as we can get information. And it was basically categorized based on all of these elements, the more suitable for development and less suitable. So you'll note that the less suitable has 5-acre zoning or proposed, and the most suitable had 2-acre zoning, because you could probably get a septic system and a well on 2 acres in that where you might not be able to find suitable area for a structure and those utilities on the less suitable land. And then we looked at the Complan to see what it said, and the criteria that we have to look at is, does it conform with the comprehensive plan, and does it conform or support the public health, safety, and welfare? So those zoning designations limited the density, limited the potential for land use conflicts, provided some potential commercial opportunities on the RA. And we also have to look at spot zoning, which is illegal in the state. So these are large enough tracts, but 1 or 2 lots is something we counsel people that you can apply, but the odds of you getting it is probably pretty low because of the spot zoning criteria that we have to review. And then code enforcement. So I used to be able to say we had a 300 plus open code enforcement cases. We're now at 400 plus. Some of these cases date back to the 1990s, largely junkyards, but some other things as well. We have 1 code enforcement office for the entire borough for 400 cases. And he was doing air quality when we had air quality citations available. So not only does he do Title 18, but other titles as well. The borough established priority for cases about a year and a half ago, and junkyards and right-of-way encroachments were the top 2 priorities, and anything else that is direct public health, safety, and welfare. So encroachments, we look at access. You know, if a fire truck or a road maintenance crew can't get through there, then that's a higher priority than just stacked up on the outside of the right-of-way. But so I don't know how many encroachments. I forgot to ask that yesterday. Hopefully by noon I'll have that information too. But probably, we've cleaned up some, but there's probably 50, maybe more encroachments as well out there. We do enforcement via voluntary compliance, which is slower and more difficult to achieve.
Are these instances often signaled by the public, you know, you should look into this, gee?
Yes. Yeah. It used to be the only way we could take a complaint is if it was somebody in close proximity, i.e. they had standing to make the complaint. Mm-hmm. That was repealed in, I think, late 2017, skyrocketed, because now people can make complaints anonymously, which people were in fear of their neighbors. And so they didn't want to make complaints, or they just didn't want to rock the boat, but they wanted it cleaned up. And so complaints probably quadrupled after that change, where standing was no longer required. So code enforcement has impacts on aesthetics, quality of life, access, and marketability of property. So I used to live like 2 properties down from this one, and these are actually pretty good photos. So the before just shows the front of the house. There's a hole to the side and to the back that isn't cleaned up yet, but he's making progress. And this is one of the guys that might benefit if a neighborhood group got together to help him. Because sometimes, not always, sometimes these folks are elderly, they have physical problems, or at least that's what they tell us, that they can't physically do it themselves, they're relying on friends. And so, you know, if there was some sort of a program where the community got together and help, and, you know, whether it's the Eagle Scouts or church groups or whatever, could help clean these up, we might see more of these.
Well, you stated relying on voluntary compliance predominantly. What does that mean?
So,
You identify to the property owner that an issue has happened and
Yes.
give them time to
Yes.
take care of it themselves.
yes, and, you know, as long as they're trying, you know, we don't go to citation, but with one code enforcement officer, even citations are a very onerous process because, you know, there's timelines, and eventually you have to go to court, or if they contest it, you do. And so we've written letters and letters and letters and letters, and our code enforcement methodology is weak. We have a limit on 2 citations a calendar year and $300 for like junkyards per citation. Not going to make any change. So we either need to devote a lot more resources, i.e. code enforcement personnel, so that they can follow up, you know, immediately. You know, you got 30 days to do X, Y, Z, and that's something we're doing now, is requiring compliance plans. So like here, a property owner would need to say, all right, I'm going to clean up this area by this date, and then we go out and inspect it. And if they do that, then they get the timeline to keep going. If they don't, then we have to take stronger measures. But that's very, very recent. I mean, it's just been so, well, I'll clean it up by November, except that it doesn't happen. And then, so the winter's there, and you can't, you know, dig a bus out of the snowdrift. So then it's next spring, and we have a short cleanup season. So we're having to get more methodical about this and try and do it. But, you know, one personnel just, and the Assembly last budget year gave us some cleanup money. But we're still trying. We had an RFP out for towing to get stuff out of the right-of-way. Got no bidders. So, you know, there's a lot of hoops we're jumping through and trying to make progress. We've made a little progress here. There's a couple of right-of-way cleanups. So you can see the below right. This is the first one when we got cleaned up, and it really makes a difference. Some of these are out in the travel way. So, and then here's another one. And so we've had a few successes, but it is tough. And so we just keep plugging at it, and unfortunately the complaints are coming in faster than the cleanups can. So, and this is just, this is more for the rest of the chamber, but ways to gain more planning and zoning knowledge of, we have a community planning website. You can come to our counter, you can call our phone at any time, get information, community meetings, serving on a board and commission, and, you know, right now we're filling some planning commission vacancies, and we'll have probably at least one more in the near future to fill.
I was on the planning board for a while. It was interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That was interesting, thank you.
Yeah. So, general kind of public outreach. We do web surveys on various topics. We have focus groups or working groups that we invite the public to be on. In fact, one of our new potential planning commission members lives in the Well Street neighborhood and got involved because of the focus school, controversial home study school in that neighborhood that the neighborhood was not happy about, didn't think was appropriate, and he's been involved ever since. He's now coming to the downtown working group meetings and will soon be appointed to the Planning Commission. So just evolves over time. And then we have advocacy in long-range planning documents, whether it's the downtown plan or Salcha Badger, involvement and interest in rezones, and then we always offer pre-application conferences for free about any application so that people can get educated about how best to present their information to the Planning Commission to get approved, and kind of the issues and pitfalls and that kind of thing. So, and then in summary, Planning and Zoning Matters. It's the vision for future development of our community. It guides our community decisions. It's focused on land use compatibility and quality of life and impacts marketability of property. And it's a citizen-driven process. Participation equals knowledge. And an informed, involved citizenry is a powerful force in determining our community's future. Thank you. And wow, that
That's
was...
an hour.
I know, I'm gonna have to cut that back. I know I don't have that kind of time at the,
Will we ask questions?
Yeah, well, no, I know, but I hadn't timed this, so there's way too much information there.
So like, you know, my experience at Chamber is like 20 minutes.
Yeah, I know, so I'm gonna have to cut it back, so.
Well, if I may say, while we're still on a hot mic, so again, I was on the planning board, so I got to see how that operated. I got to meet the staff. I was very impressed. And then we did get to watch a bit from the outside as far as the Salcha Badger process. And it was a model process, and so I wanted to give kudos to you and your staff.
Thank you.
Again, hearing about the level of community involvement, it's always hard to get community involvement. You send out all those postcards, you send out 1,000 and 5 people
Right.
show up if you're lucky. But again, the efforts you all went through to get that information, get that feedback, so that you could build it into a plan that really accommodated both what there is now, but also but serve as a guide for what we'd like to see in the future. I just wanted to give you kudos and to you.
Thank you. We, you know, most of us have learned the hard way that putting the time in up front is worthwhile so that it doesn't blow up at the end. And we had nobody testifying at the Planning Commission or the Assembly that I'm aware of in opposition. So that is a huge accomplishment.
That's a huge accomplishment.
So, yeah.
Cool. Other questions?
Yeah, I'd like to recommend another zone, a riparian zone. And it's clear to me, at least, that all of our streams need to be protected because water is the basis for life. And that's certainly one of your life safety issues. I know there are setbacks to certain bodies of water. It's not taken as seriously as a zone would be taken, it seems to me, because I see an awful lot of violation right along the Chain River, for example. People dumping their grass into the river.
Oh, geez.
Of course, it used to be dead cars, but at least that's...
I guess that's an improvement, but not much.
That was for bank stabilization.
Yeah.
I understand. And you got rid of your car without having to take it to the dump. But, and also, in the very near future, we're going to be looking at a climate action plan. It seems like that might add to your duties, and I'm wondering where we are in terms of getting ready for that.
It's not on our radar project-wise from zoning. I guess it's going to, it will depend on what comes out of that plan and how zoning and subdivisions would play into that. Because, I mean, that's part of the driving piece of it. If we're reducing our carbon emissions, that's a piece of it. But then, you know, as spread out as we are in this borough, how do you not drive? So, but yes, ultimately zoning could play a part in the implementation of that plan. So, and we do actually have an open space buffer zone. It's just not as widely implemented along all the water bodies as it could be. It's sort of piecemeal here and there based on whatever was happening in the past. We haven't put any new on the land since I've been here, but it is out there, and we actually talked about this in the downtown, having an open space buffer along the river, and the working group wasn't particularly in favor of that. So it's something to look at right now, the open space buffer only allows a very few limited uses, as a riparian zone should, so.
If I could make one comment on climate action plan, the June 2019 Civil Engineering magazine has a really interesting look at Los Angeles County sustainability plan. And I'll give you the links and websites.
Sure, that'd be great.
They're taking climate change very seriously.
I think
They're at sea
Seattle's
level.
done one too.
They're at sea level.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and so huge things are happening if you're anywhere close to an ocean. And I don't think we're going to be troubled so much by the ocean, but who knows? We might have waterfront property out here.
Well, if our permafrost melts, we're gonna have some problems.
Oh, I mean, as it thaws,
Oh,
we are
as
going
it
to have.
melts, not if.
Okay, other questions? Well, Christine, thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate
your
it.
time and appreciate the information.
Thanks for the opportunity to time my presentation.
And just for everybody, just to let you know, again, for next week, we're gonna have some special guests. The delegation from Yakutsk, our sister city in Yakutsk, are gonna be in town. The borough called over, asked if we'd like to have them. I said, why, sure, because they'd like to come. So they'll be here next week. I'm not sure exactly what the subject will be, but that'll be forthcoming, and I'll set it out with the notice. Okay, but yes, our friends from Yakutsk will be here next
So
week.
brush up on your Russian.
Brush up on your Russian.
With love.
We have ways of making you talk, Mr. Bond.
Could we make a copy of this?
Yes,
Oh,
we can.
thanks.
Sure.
Yes, 1, 2,
1, 2, 3. Yeah,
let me make sure.
okay.
Yeah, here's the end of it.
Okay, we're signing off.
Thanks. So you have call-in, folks?
Thanks, Jomo. Take care, dear.
You're welcome. Out there 2 days ago, okay,
Did you get people to sign in?